Clifford Geertz's The Interpretation of Cultures, 1973, stands as one of the most influential works in the field of anthropology. In this collection of essays, Geertz redefined the ways in which culture is understood, advocating for an interpretive approach that focuses on the symbolic and meaningful aspects of human life. Rather than seeing culture as a set of practices or social structures, Geertz contended that culture must be analyzed as a web of symbols that people use to make sense of their world. Through his work, Geertz elevated the role of interpretation in the study of cultures, influencing a range of disciplines from anthropology to sociology, history, and cultural studies. The concept of culture as a web of meaning. At the heart of Geertz's argument is his definition of culture. In the opening essay of The Interpretation of Cultures, titled Thick Description, Toward an Interpretive Theory of Culture, Geertz presents the idea of culture as a web of significance that individuals spin themselves. This metaphor emphasizes that culture is not a set of objective, externally imposed facts, but a deeply embedded system of meanings that individuals interpret and live through. Geertz's symbolic approach contrasts with earlier anthropological models that viewed culture more mechanically or deterministically as a system of traits or social institutions. For Geertz, understanding a culture requires a thick description of the meanings embedded in people's actions, rituals, and symbols. The term thick description is borrowed from philosopher Gilbert Ryle, and it refers to the idea that any action or behavior must be understood in its cultural context, considering both its external manifestation and the internal meanings ascribed to it by the participants. Geertz illustrated this concept through the famous example of the Balinese cockfight, a symbolic ritual where the apparent action of betting on and watching cockfights reveals a complex system of social and cultural meanings. By looking beyond the external behavior to the layers of interpretation behind it, Geertz demonstrated how culture is a system of symbols that requires careful analysis. The role of the anthropologist as interpreter. Geertz's approach to culture also redefines the role of the anthropologist. Instead of an objective observer who simply documents the facts of a culture, Geertz suggests that the anthropologist is an interpreter who must navigate the thick web of meanings that constitute a culture. In this sense, anthropology becomes a form of hermeneutics, an interpretive discipline that seeks to uncover the meanings behind cultural practices and symbols. Geertz's methodology involves the use of ethnography not as a neutral record, but as a document of interpretation. He argues that ethnographers must go beyond surface-level observations and engage with the symbolic meanings embedded in everyday life. This requires an in-depth understanding of the local language, context, and historical background, as well as an appreciation for the subtleties and complexities that shape people's behaviors. The anthropologist, according to Geertz, is like a ferryman who guides the reader through the cultural context, interpreting the social world and translating it into a form that others can understand. Geertz's ethnographic work in Bali and Morocco exemplifies this approach. His studies of local life were not just about observing customs and practices, they involved interpreting these practices within the broader cultural and historical frameworks in which they took place. For instance, in his famous study of the Balinese cockfight, Geertz did not just describe the event, but interpreted it as a commentary on social hierarchy, masculinity, and status. Through this lens, the cockfight becomes a metaphor for the broader social structure, revealing deeper truths about the society in which it occurs. The significance of symbolism in culture. A major aspect of Geertz's work is his focus on symbolism. He argued that culture is composed of symbols that help individuals make sense of their lives. These symbols, whether they are rituals, religious beliefs, language, or art, carry specific meanings that are understood within a given cultural context. According to Geertz, the role of culture is not merely to regulate behavior or maintain social order, but to provide a framework for understanding the world. In Geertz's view, symbols are not static, they are dynamic, changing over time and adapting to new contexts. This dynamic nature of culture means that anthropologists must approach cultural analysis with sensitivity to these changes, always interpreting symbols in light of the evolving historical and social conditions. For Geertz, the study of symbols is at the heart of understanding the human experience, as they mediate between the individual and society, providing the tools for people to interpret and make sense of their own existence. Geertz's interpretation of religion serves as a key example of his theory of symbolism. In his essay, Religion as a Cultural System, Geertz argues that religious systems are complex webs of symbols that provide answers to life's fundamental questions. He compares religious symbols to a map, showing how they direct individuals to understand their place in the world, their relationship to the divine, and the nature of existence. Religious symbols, according to Geertz, do not merely reflect reality. They actively construct it by shaping the way individuals perceive their world and their social relationships. Critiques and contributions to anthropology. Geertz's interpretive approach to anthropology has been both widely praised and critiqued. One of the major critiques is that his emphasis on interpretation leads to a form of relativism, where all cultural practices are understood as valid within their own contexts, without any basis for comparison or critique. Critics argue that this approach can make it difficult to address issues such as human rights abuses or social injustices, because it relies too heavily on the idea that cultural meanings must be understood from the inside. However, Geertz responded to these critiques by stressing that his approach is not about excusing harmful practices, but about understanding how they are embedded in cultural meanings. By interpreting cultural practices as symbols that are meaningful to those who engage in them, the anthropologist is able to offer insights into how these practices function within their respective societies. Geertz did not intend to suggest that all cultural practices are equally valid, but rather that understanding them requires a deeper exploration of the cultural context in which they are situated. Another critique is that Geertz's approach is overly focused on symbolic analysis and overlooks the material and economic factors that shape culture. Critics argue that Geertz's focus on symbols and meaning neglects the importance of economic and political structures in shaping cultural practices. While Geertz's work acknowledges these factors, it prioritizes the symbolic and interpretive dimensions of culture over the structural or materialist explanations that had dominated anthropology in previous decades. This has led some scholars to argue that Geertz's approach is too idealist and does not adequately address the power dynamics and social inequalities that often underlie cultural practices. Despite these criticisms, Geertz's work has made profound contributions to anthropology and other social sciences. His insistence on the importance of interpretation and his emphasis on the symbolic nature of culture have influenced a wide range of disciplines. Scholars in sociology, political science, and cultural studies have drawn on Geertz's ideas to analyze everything from the politics of identity to the role of mass media in shaping contemporary culture. His work has also had a lasting impact on the study of religion, helping to shape how scholars approach the symbolic dimensions of religious practices and beliefs. Clifford Geertz's The Interpretation of Cultures represents a pivotal shift in the way anthropology and other social sciences understand culture. By emphasizing culture as a web of symbols and meaning, Geertz laid the groundwork for an interpretive approach to cultural analysis that remains influential today. His focus on thick description, the role of the anthropologist as an interpreter, and the significance of symbolism in shaping human experience have provided scholars with new tools to understand the complexities of human societies. While his approach has faced critiques, it has nonetheless had a profound and lasting impact on the study of culture, making The Interpretation of Cultures a landmark work in the field of anthropology.